What do you do when a child's on fire? We saw children on fire. What do you do when a child's on fire in a war that was a mistake? What do you do? Like, write a letter?
In 1964, I could not have questioned that war because it was against communism. My church supported it. Who was I to say, don't do it?
Aggression by terror against the peaceful villagers of South Vietnam has now been joined by open aggression on the high seas against the United States of America.
My generation was brought up on the idea that if the government says we have to go to war, you have to go to war because they know better than you. It never entered our minds that we knew or we could know more than the government about a situation like that.
As the 60s grew through the Johnson, Kennedy, and then the Johnson administrations, we saw the number of deaths, both civilian and soldiers who were killed, growing every day. It was something that had to be stopped.
Around halfway between the time I joined the Navy and the time I got out, I remember we would get into discussions about the war. At that time, I was defending the war still. And this one fellow, he said to me, tell me, John, what do you think the people of North and South Vietnam want? What do you think the people want in their villages? And without even hesitating, I looked at him, I said, they want the bombing to stop. He said, that's right. And at that instant, I turned against that war.
I can remember being at the U.S. naval docks in Philadelphia. The refrigerator ships were coming in from Vietnam, and this one day they had 440 caskets they were unloading. I remember longshoremen and myself and other men and women who were there greeting the caskets and putting them into hearses, and how we wept. And at that time I said I would do whatever I could to stop that type of war.
We make our prayer in the name of that God whose name is peace and decency and unity and love. Amen.
The Catholic left was really a faith-based part of a larger movement dedicated to peace in Vietnam and peace generally and social change. A lot of my work was motivated by my understanding of the gospel, my commitment to Catholicism and Christianity, the teachings of Jesus.
Dan Berrigan and Phil Berrigan began to make their moves in those years of the 60s, and I was interested in what they were doing. The Sermon on the Mount and Turn the Other Cheek and all of that kind of thing, and I began to rethink my ideas and so forth, and say that, well, if the Christian truth is to be preached, it's got to be without guns, it has got to be without killing, and that Jesus would have died for the ones who killed him, and that would be the only solution. So that's how it kind of got going.
Our church has failed to act officially, and we feel that as individuals we're going to have to speak out in the name of Catholicism and Christianity.
And all of a sudden here's a significant number, not only of Catholic, but priests and nuns opposing their government, openly opposing their government, breaking laws. So I think it was a quality of astonishment to the fact that not only was it left, but it was Catholic left.
Sympathizers inside the court gave a standing ovation today in support of 9 Catholic pacifists who went on trial in Baltimore. Their charge was seizing and burning draft records in suburban Catonsville.
See, a draft board was a wonderful reality in the sense that it was the point of contact between the human being, between Mr. and Mrs. America and their son, John, and possibility of his coming back in a body bag. It was how the tentacle of the power reached down into your house and took your son. So it was a great focal point in this power that had such control over lives. It could actually demand of you your life for some insane reason that you would be killing somebody else's son in a delta in Vietnam. So if you hit this tentacle, you would send some little signals back up to the central power that there are people down there think this is really insane and evil, what's going on here.
Remember the very first action, the action that we kind of trace our roots back to, was the Baltimore 4 in October of '67, and then the Catonsville 9 in May of '68. So these things had started. Milwaukee 14 was in September of '68. But the standby actions were taking files out, basically, and destroying them outside and standing by. They were meant to make a statement. Those were very, very powerful actions. They were as powerful in their own way as, let's say, the early sit-ins in the civil rights movement in the South, where people literally sat down knowing they were going to be arrested.
We pleaded our case. The jury decided that it wasn't worthy of being heard and found us guilty.
Our big effort then was to stop it. You know, whether we could change the system of government, that could come later. Right now, we just had to stop this war. You know? And if every draft board in the country was invaded, they could not fight the war. They legally could not draft until they put those records back together.
They were only destroying or mutilating a few hundred records. And as time went on, we found two things. One, we were not really stopping the draft board from functioning. And two, people were standing by and getting arrested, and more of our best people were going on trial and going off to jail. And it was becoming difficult to find people that were willing to sacrifice that much or risk that much. And somebody came up with the idea, why don't we just go into a draft board and take the records out, shut the place down.
A group of us in Philadelphia and South Jersey, Camden area, had met and talked about what we could do in New Jersey and in Camden to make a strong statement against the war and the draft. And there were other draft board actions around the country at that time, and we thought, well, we could also do one in Camden. In Camden, we saw a good number of poor black and poor Spanish-speaking being drafted in a disproportionate number and sent overseas and dying in a disproportionate number in this war. The draft board in Camden was located on the 5th floor of the Federal Building, which was in downtown Camden. We began a surveillance, a casing of the Federal Building at night because we thought we could best carry out the draft board raid during the night. We had, I would say, 5 to 6 of us who were doing surveillance or casing on a regular basis almost every night, if not 4 or 5 times during the week.
This is a portico, St. Paul's Episcopal Church, across from the courthouse. And several of us, every night, would station ourselves right here. We could see very clearly pretty much the entire front of the building. We could see through the doors in the front where the guard was situated.
We wanted to remain nonviolent, and that meant that we did not want to do any violence to any individual. So part of the reason we also cased is to make sure that there wasn't an individual in there that might get hurt or try to hurt us, who we might have to fight or whatever.
So it was a very good place to watch the entire building and the movements of the guard, so we could tell if he left that post every hour on the hour or just randomly or only once or twice a night or whatever.
So we were watching the building from wherever we could, rooftops, on the street, alleys, and so forth.
It was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I brought my car up here, drove up here to the top, parked in, I believe it was either this space or that space, and set up to spend the night, because what we were interested in was when they brought the flag out and from what office they brought it out, which would give us a time when the first person in the morning would be on the floor. And where they came out was the window right nearest the flag. The gentleman came out and ran the flagpole up, and this was about 7:30. John Grady mentioned that we would like to know the timing when the first person most likely would be in or on that floor of the building, and that the way to get that timing would be to be somewhere where you could see
where the person was when they came out to raise the flag, because the flag was the first thing they did in the morning.
John was basically run the meeting, and it was because he had the most experience. He knew what was going on. He knew what had to be done, and he knew, from what we could see, the kind of people that you would need to do that. His involvement, from everything that we all knew, went back all the way back to Catonsville and before. He was a good friend of Dan Berrigan's, which of course is an impressive thing, you know, when you're talking to somebody who was on the cover of Time magazine, you know, that kind of stuff.
John's personality was like a big fish in the pond. He created a lot of circles, a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, a lot of laughter, a lot of celebration. So he was certainly a central personality in the group.
You know, I remember Grady talking about Phil Berrigan's concepts of removing coats of fear. You know, the more coats of fear you remove from yourself, like losing my job or having people know that I'm an anti-war freak or that kind of stuff. Dropping those coats of fear enables you to do more. Makes you freer to be able to do things. And these were the kind of things that were brought up at these meetings.
In our surveillance work and preparation, which went on for months, we did discover at one point that the FBI were, at least I thought, on to us. I went to a meeting down in Hyanella where Martha Schmeely had an apartment, and so there was meetings being held in our apartment. As I drove into this complex here, I meet a white car going out with New York license plates, and the driver was looking back. He turned his head and looked back because John Grady, member of the Camden 28, was standing in the doorway. That alerted me to something going on here, but then there was another man on this side of the street, just across here, walking in here, and he was, you know, well clipped in a short sleeve shirt and the brown shoes, and I said, that's an FBI agent. So what I did was I walked on past Martha Schmeely's house and then went up where there was a dumpster. I went right to it. I took this letter and I tore it up in little pieces, threw it in, kept throwing it in, kept throwing it in. I just kept throwing in this letter till I had it all thrown in, and then I walked away from it, and then went a certain distance and turned around. When I turned around, the man who was standing the far side of the street was looking into the dumpster on the other side of the street. And then I went in and I got John Grady and I brought him upstairs and I opened the curtain and looked out through the drape. And another fellow came along jogging and met the fellow that was looking in the dumpster. There were two. So I said, you know, we're under surveillance here. The FBI is here.
So with this information, we met that night and decided just to cool things off for a while and not to do any surveillance for a few days. When we did meet again a few days later, we realized that we needed more people, we needed more help if we were ever going to carry off this draft board action. That led me to call Bob Hardy, who was a good friend.
Mike Giaconda came to my house. What I didn't know until that moment is that he had been involved in a draft board break-in in Camden, and they were trying to make it happen, and they couldn't get it done, and it was pretty much dead, and he wanted to know if I wanted to be a part of it, just to take a look at it. And I believe sometime in the next couple of days, like a Wednesday or Thursday evening, I met with the people that they brought in.
The next meeting that I went to, and I was flabbergasted when I went in to see Bob Hardy there.
I remember when he learned that Bob Hardy was going to come in, he was kind of surprised. Surprised because he didn't think, you know, Bob would be involved in a draft board raid.
We were good friends. Michael and my wife and I and our children knew Father Doyle very well. He was at our house at least once a week. And when I joined the church, he was the priest that brought me into the church. And I remember he looked at me and he said, "Bob, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Mike," I said, "these are a good bunch of people, and I don't want them to get caught. Maybe I can help them so they don't get caught."
Bob was a big help because he was a professional handyman. He made his living by making home repairs of all kinds, and we needed some of that experience to get into the federal building.
The surveillance that they had done up to that point had been fruitless almost, because they couldn't figure out how to break into this place, and they couldn't. They did not know how to break into a federal building. And unless you're involved in construction work, it appears to be almost impossible. When they said, well, how do you break into a window? I would teach them how to break into. How do you climb a ladder? I would teach them how to climb a ladder. I would teach them how to cut glass so they could cut the glass, reach in, unlock the window, and open the window.
The idea of casing, obviously, was to get as much information as possible as you could about the building, and most of it was done from the outside. It was very rare that you could get inside, because that was a tough thing to do, just go in and during the day or any time at all and be inobtrusive and get the information. We had an opportunity to get inside the building, and we certainly grabbed up on it.
I said, well, look, I'll go inside. I'll take somebody with me. I'll ask for the manager and tell him that I'm interested in the draft board system. Since I'm a citizen in Camden, I have a right to know, and somebody can go with me, and they can look around. And I said, I'll observe everything. I'll get the square footage, get the light layout, check the locks, check electric, check for alarms. I said, we'll make up a little report, if you will.
So this one particular day, we went up to the board, went into the room, and I think the lady's name was Mrs. Furlong, who was running the board. We walk up to her desk. He starts very glibly talking to her, and he kind of glances at me. So I go over and I sit down, and going over the entire thing, like, what's at that window, what's at that window, there are files over there. You know, the position of everything. And I mean, I just sat there and remembered it all. We left the draft board. Hardy says, let's take a look at the rest of this place. Now, I am like in total awe of this guy's non-fear. I mean, this guy is not afraid of anything. We get down to the first floor. He says, let's try out our idea on the post office guy, see how much we can find out about the back loading dock from this side. We got on the loading dock, we're looking down. Hardy looks down there and he sees the fire escape that we had planned to go up. And he goes, oh, that looks like an alarm there. You guys have that alarm so that we can go up? And they go, oh yeah, if anybody tries to pull that down, an alarm will go off. Oh. You know, hugely valuable piece of information. Anyway, we walk out of there and my jaw's down to here. He's patting me on the back.
They couldn't believe all the information we brought back. They were so excited. Gene Dixon thought he had just climbed Mount Everest, you know.
It was all, you know, because Bob had taken all these risks going in there and talking to the people, or I would be terrified to walk in and do that.
That was the first time that I ever came to the conclusion this thing might happen. I never really believed up to that point that it would happen.
We were pretty much at the ready, I think, in the middle of August to do our draft board, action.
Doing an action in Camden was just really expressing that point of view, that damaged cities which destroyed children was a casualty of a policy that put weaponry before homes and children and people. I always saw the connection between the condition of Camden and the waste of the military.
Originally, I got a call from my sister, who had been very actively involved in that project. And the call was that there was a need for some assistance. We went to New York to get a bus to come to Camden and learned that no buses were coming to Camden, that there were full-scale riots going on in the city. So, we just got a map and went out and hitchhiked down to Camden to arrive in the middle of these riots. There was a tremendous amount of chaos and violence. The one address I knew to go, people weren't there. Because of the riots, they had to relocate. So here we were, two white women, not from Camden, on the street in the midst of this great confusion.
A local Hispanic man had been pulled over by two white Camden policemen on Market Street, and I think he might have had a few drinks, but he gave them some lip anyway, so they beat him. But then he died.
Puerto Rican community, mainly Puerto Rican community, Spanish-speaking community in Camden, really erupted in protest to this.
It didn't take many words to set them off, and they just went out onto Broadway and started burning it down. We were coming on the heels of that with the action on August 22nd. We gathered on the Saturday night in Dr. Anderson's building on Broadway. So in a room upstairs there we had a meal together, and we were planning that action that night.
I went to Bill Anderson's apartment there in Camden. I was dressed in a suit because I had been someplace that day that required a suit. But they were all caught back because they had only up to that time seen me in my work clothes. And one of them said, "Geez, you look like an FBI agent."
There was an air of seriousness and apprehension, anticipation. It was those contradictions living together. And it was interesting, because there were men and women involved in this, but the men somehow all came to the table first. And my sister did comment to me that it sort of looked like the Last Supper.
And I remember somebody looking around and counting and saying, "Oh, Last Supper, ha ha ha, 13 of us, ha ha ha. Which one is the Judas?"
So as the people left, there was a certain amount of emotion, it was a moment of real connection, and people hugging each other and hoping for safety and well-being and good outcome. And so I was feeling a little emotional after that. And Bob Hardy comforted me. He was still in the house, and he turned to me, he gave me a great hug, and sort of reassured me not to worry and things would be okay.
After the dinner, we then got on to the truck. So we drove in that truck over to the backyard of the federal building, and that truck was reversed in.
Scrambling across the roof and up the fire escape, you could enter the draft board offices through the windows on the 5th floor.
Milo was a local minister, as I recall, who lived about a block away from the courthouse with his wife in a typical little Camden row house. But there was no row house right next to it, so we could actually look out of his side window and see the federal building. We were the headquarters, and I was in radio contact with everybody who was blocking intersections as the people went in, so that no police would accidentally drive by and see a bunch of people going up the back way into the federal building. What folks would do is feign a car breaking down at an intersection. So if any cops did come by, they would just flag him down, saying, "Officer, my car just broke down," But I was on a walkie-talkie, talking to everybody at these intersections and the people inside.
We're reading you loud and clear, so everything's fine. Over. We're safe.
Our job was to be across the street from the federal building in a church courtyard. There was a security guard in the building.
Street calling.
So our job was to observe this so they could time their work in a way that wouldn't collide with the security guard.
You are so beautiful.
I pulled in on 6th Street between Cooper and Market at the end of the alley behind the post office. Shut off my engine, lifted up the hood as if I was having engine trouble. I noticed there was no traffic in the area whatsoever, and that made me nervous.
Moving to Street, we're going to go ahead with our entering in the game, all right? Over. There aren't any better gamers. No better gamers. Go on, right on. We're here.
When we did go into the post office, it was shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning.
We were going for the A1 files, but they're the ones that listed the people who would be first going off to Vietnam.
Okay, I need you loud and clear.
We worked for a couple hours at bagging records that we wanted to take. We destroyed some records there, just tearing them up and leaving them on the floor.
I did not have any thoughts of the morality of this or that. It was just get this thing done because the pressure was on and the job had to be done.
Little man to assistant, could you give me an estimate on how much time you're going to need? Assistant to little man, we're leaving in about 20 minutes. Over.
Well, no sooner that was said, I heard someone shout, "Freeze! It's the FBI!"
There's a guard coming! There's a guard coming! There's a guard coming! There's a guard coming!
And I said, "What, are you serious?" And he said, "Yeah, there's a guard coming." And I could see the draft board, and all the lights went on. I'm standing in Miles' house watching all these lights go on a block away. And I thought, why are they turning lights on? This is crazy.
And then 3 guys jumped me inside. They were just miserable. I mean, I couldn't believe it. The way they just threw me on the ground. One guy jumped with his 2 knees into my chest. I mean, I felt, and I looked up at them and I said, "So this is the FBI?"
Each of the special agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation must be ready and capable to meet any challenge. The security of our nation or the life of a loved one may depend upon him. It is imperative, therefore, that each of our special agents be thoroughly trained. Our team of dedicated, loyal men and women is ready to serve the nation and you at all times. We are as close to you as your telephone.
How could they know everything? How could they find everybody in the right place? So there had to be an informer. Then who was not arrested?
Somebody turned us in.
We were all taken and rounded up in a holding cell in the basement. I think it's the basement of the building, the first floor of the building. All of us were certainly stunned and angry about our arrest. That we figured out that the only person who was not there, was Bob Hardy.
The FBI early today caught an anti-war group in the act as it was trying to steal records from a draft board in Camden, New Jersey. 20 persons were arrested, including 2 Catholic priests and a Protestant minister.
This was the headquarters of the alleged conspiracy. For 4 months, as many as 27 people worked here on a plot to burglarize the Camden Selective Service Office, the FBI office, and a U.S. Army Intelligence Center. They had maps, charts, radios, transceivers, mock-ups of federal building windows, glass-cutting tools, and according to the FBI, they were being taught how to pick locks, exactly like the ones in the federal building. The FBI infiltrated the group several months ago. Today, when the burglary was to occur, agents were there. The alleged conspirators went up a fire escape at the back of the building. They knew enough to avoid the first section. It had an alarm. They got into the Selective Service office on the 4th floor and ransacked it, throwing records into 12 large brown bags, then tossed the bags out the window. FBI agents recovered them today. They will be held as evidence.
Bob Hardy knocked on the door. I went to the door, and it was interesting because often you open the door and people start talking right away. You know, what their problem is, what they want to get the FBI involved in. Hardy had somewhat of a, if not perplexed, kind of a look of if not indecision, like, what am I going to do? You know, I'm here, and what am I going to do? And that's kind of how he prefaced it. It was like, I have some friends, you know, some people I know. They were talking about breaking into a draft board, and you know, I don't think it's right, and I don't know what to do about it. And I said, well, what we'd like you to do is tell them you're going to join the group, and then I will meet with you regularly, myself and someone else, and so we can keep track of what they're doing, so we can either, you know, stop them before they do it, or if they do it, we can arrest them at that time. In other words, tell him that he would report to me, and I would report the information to my superiors, and we would see what happened. And I said, well, who's the leader of the group? And he said he didn't know. He said, however, that evening he would be working at a carnival at his church, and if I came by, he'd get that information from me. So I got with another agent and drove down to Camden, where this carnival was going on, and Bob Hardy was there at this booth, and he just kind of nodded to me like he saw I was there. He kind of motioned for me. I went over, and he handed me a piece of paper and walked away and looked at the paper, and the paper said, the group's leader is John Peter Grady. Well, when we heard this, Mr. Grady was someone who the FBI was aware of and thought might be involved in some of these draft board break-ins, or at least they were looking at him. So with this, we realized that, well, maybe this group is something that could lead us to media. Media was a town in Pennsylvania where we had what we call an FBI resident agency. Somebody broke into the resident agency. This information started showing up in newspapers. Some of our techniques, some of our tactics, how we did some of these things. So once again, the FBI's information was out there. Mr. Hoover was quite upset by this. It was, this is the FBI. You have penetrated us. It became almost looked upon as a personal thing. To solve the media burglary, we had really very little to go on. So all we could do was say who might be involved. People against the war, people who have espoused anti-government views. So this whole conglomeration of people who fell within that category were maybe being looked at and observed and just seeing what we could develop, hoping one thing would lead to another.
I had no knowledge of the media break-in. I had read about it in the paper, of course, but I did know that the FBI asked me if I could find out who done it. I did try to find out. That's the one thing I could not get Al Grady or anybody that worked with him. If I had found out who did it, I could think of the kin, it would still be the same as finding out where Jimmy Hoffa is buried today. When I went into the Camden Post Office, I went into the FBI's office, and it was my first meeting with Bill Anderson and Terry Nice. I told them what I had learned the night before from Mike Giaconda, and that I needed help in stopping this thing, and they asked me to keep them informed. Would I let them know what was going on, and that if I lost any time or money, incurred any expenses in helping them, they would reimburse me for that, which seemed fair to me.
Although liberal in some social and economic areas, he was, I think, quite a conservative on law and order. He didn't believe you should break the law. His friends were going to break the law, and he felt he had to do something about that. He knew he put them in some jeopardy.
They brought us to jail from Camden that Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening to Atlantic County Jail, which is in Mays Landing, New Jersey. And so the men were brought there. The women were kept in jail here in Camden in the City Hall.
I walked into that cell block and put that cup down, threw that mattress down. I laid down on that mattress, and I remember just lying on my back, looking up at that ceiling and saying to myself, 47 years. You are facing 47 years.
It was reaction to Hardy from inside the jail, and both Mick Doyle and Mike Giaconda were very, very hurt.
It was really devastating. I mean, I knew Bob for a long time, and I thought we had such a close relationship that he would not have done anything like this.
I felt betrayed. I couldn't imagine that he would have turned us in.
There were a number of nights I really could not sleep while we were in jail, thinking about that, and really almost sometimes waking up with almost nightmarish thoughts of what I would do. I don't know if I ever said anything about this before. If I were to meet Bob, what would I do if I ever met him face to face? It's still sometimes difficult to think about that time, really is.
I believe in the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and I stand for it. Just like I believe in the Beatitudes and the Ten Commandments. I've lived by these things all my life. And I have been ostracized for it. I've been cursed for it. I've been yelled at. I've been called all kinds of names for his sake. Yeah. I don't apologize for what I've done. Sometime in a very short time after that, I got a letter signed by J. Edgar Hoover. It said, Dear Mr. Hardy, I wish to take the time to thank you for what you've done. You've done in 10 weeks what would have taken 200 agents a year to accomplish. Our country is very grateful, something like that. And it was 50 $100 bills. I took the money. I thought it was a reward. Well, it was.
When we did get out of jail, and I was up at St. Joe's Parish in East Camden, John Swingler said to me, well, he said, if you are for peace and you're trying to make peace, then you should go and talk to Hardy. So I was kind of shocked by it, but I thought about it and I said, John is right. I should go see him. So I went over, and Bob said, "I've been sitting here waiting for you to come." That annoyed me, because somehow it seemed that he was presuming to be in charge or something, even of my life or my responses or whatever. That didn't please me, that statement. So that was very, very hard for me. So I was following some kind of like principles, but my guts were not in it. Sandy Grady came over to visit Bob Hardy because he wanted to do a story for the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. And he would write little features. That was a sort of his work. And Bob Hardy was going out with his son Billy to get something to eat and maybe get a pair of shoes. But anyway, those plans changed, and Bob went in to talk to Sandy Grady, and Billy went out and climbed a tree and slipped and fell.
He was climbing a tree, and a neighbor yelled at Billy and told him to get out of the tree, and he, in his haste to get down, he fell out of the tree and landed on a 6-inch spike fence. 3 spikes went into his stomach. And Dan lifted him off the fence and put him in his car. Billy apologized for bleeding on his seat. Yeah.
The Camden 28 rallied to that with absolute affection and support. There was no hesitation. They were absolutely, and it was quite remarkable to me, and yet one should expect that if you're talking peace and if you're talking life, you should be. They were very, very upset and very, very concerned and very supportive.
DeCondo being such a good friend of his prior to the thing, and DeCondo being so hurt and upset by what Hardy did to him, he was having a very tough time, because Michael is a very gentle person. He's a very caring, lovable guy. And he knew the Hardy family, he knew the kids, and he knew Peg. And he felt concerned for the boy. And he was torn between his reaction to Bob for what he did and what was happening to the boy and to Peg and the family. And he felt that he should go see them, but he didn't know what to do. So he and I talked about it for a while, and we decided, well, what we'll do is we'll take a walk over to the hospital, check on the condition of the boy, and if we could get to see him, go see him. And that would be that. That would probably satisfy Michael. When we go over to the hospital and we're checking on the conditions and all that, and as we're there at the desk, Hardy comes walking out of the hallway with Peg and a couple of FBI agents. And Michael was like physically taken aback. He had a very difficult time just standing there.
Both at the personal level and because we dealt professionally, tried to see him through this situation. I recall visiting, Mike and myself visiting him in the hospital. Couldn't visit Billy. He was like in intensive care. Remember visiting Bob in the hallway of the hospital. And the guy was a great guy. Here he was more or less comforting us. You know, everybody felt bad for him. A real strong individual, strong, forceful personality. Seemed like a guy could handle whatever was thrown at him.
Michael went over and just kind of shook his hand, gave him a little hug and said, "I'm sorry, Bob." And Bob said to him, "I'm sorry too." And I didn't, like, it didn't come across to me as though he were sorry about what was happening to his son and his family, but he was telling Michael he was sorry for what he did.
Peg wasn't able to go into the intensive care where Billy was, and I took her, and I remember shaking her, you know, and said, "Peg," I said, if Billy dies and you didn't go in there and talk to him and be with them, I said, you will regret it your whole life. You've got to do it. So she went in. Terribly sad thing. He lived for 3 weeks. Of course, I would have the funeral because I knew him so well, and I was very fond of him, and he knew me well, and he was a great little boy.
Most of the people in church were either federal agents or Camden 28 people. one of the principals of the Camden 28, Father Doyle, is up on the altar saying Mass.
I went myself, but I just could not get myself together to go up to see Bob or to shake his hand at that time.
The same thing happened to me today. I'm not sure I would show up at that funeral. If a friend or an acquaintance did to me what Hardy did to me today, and a child of his were injured and died, I'm not sure I would go to the funeral. But we did then. I walked up to Bob, who was up front by the casket, and he said to me at that time, he said, you know, John, someday a lot about this whole thing is going to have to come out. And I said, what do you mean a lot? And he says, well, I can't say now, but just a lot is going to have to come out.
It's different?
Very different. It's hard to get your bearings.
That wasn't there. None of that was there.
And this wasn't there.
After we got from the truck up to the metal roof, we went on the metal roof, brought the ladder up with us, and put it up to the other roof.
Yeah.
Okay. 22 seconds to get 8 people up the ladder and up the ladder again.
Yeah.
22 seconds.
22 seconds. We practiced it over and over again.
It's like tearing up manila folders. Like your hands would ache here after a bit, just tearing them.
Because it was hours and hours. There are these like primary records where you sign, you give your basic name, birth date, and whatever else. And then they're on these big like index file records, one big. And so my job was to sit there for the whole time and destroy those as rapidly as much as I could.
And there was,
while they were doing the actual files of each individual person.
Any
Cross-reference.
right?
Wouldn't have any cross-reference.
With no intention of cleaning out all the files.
Right.
Yeah,
no, we couldn't.
While we were
you have 4F and 2S, you know, student and deferred and all the rest of them. So we worked for the 1A.
When I came into the case, nullification was seen as the defense, the avenue to pursue. What it means is that when the jury concludes that the defendants do not deserve to be branded criminals, they have not done something criminal, even though they have technically violated the law, they can enter a not guilty verdict.
It would be the jury standing foursquare in the face of everything saying, we don't care. We are not finding these people guilty. Yes, we know they conspired, they went into the building, they destroyed files, etc. But we are nullifying the law. Your laws, in this case, are illegitimate. Some property really does not have any right to exist.
I was all for that. I knew that none of the anti-war cases was able to win solely on nullification.
We knew that at least half the jury was so fed up with that war and what was going on in the government at that time. Remember, Nixon's White House was starting to fall apart. Watergate was emerging. Half the jury, based on that and being fed up with the war, would never have convicted us. They were just fed up. The other half needed a legal hat rack. My feeling was, give them what they need.
Before dawn last August 22nd, 40 FBI agents staked out around the Camden, New Jersey post office building thwarted an alleged plot to raid a draft board office. 28 persons were charged. The defense asked today for a dismissal, charging that the FBI paid for the raiders' equipment and that an FBI informant trained them. The motion was accompanied by an affidavit from the alleged informant, Robert Hardy, who said, I am only setting down what actually happened.
This was the result of this series of meetings with Michael Doyle, Bob Hardy, and me. Several meetings over months. The affidavit laid out his whole role and the whole role of the FBI in basically making the raid happen.
One of the things that the FBI promised me from the very beginning, that the people in Camden, those people I considered friends, would never, never go to jail. If anything, they would get an indictment, which was more or less like a disorderly conduct type thing, or civil disobedience, which a lot of us had already gone to jail for that type of thing. But they reassured me, even up until the night of the break-in, that they would never go to jail. And of course they lied. I don't say that Terry Neese and Mike Ryman lied, but those who make a decision at the higher levels, their intention was to destroy the Catholic left. Sometime the next morning, I talked with my two agents at the FBI, Mike and Terry. I don't know whether it's on the phone or in person. And I told them, I said, you guys really screwed us. And that you lied to me all the way through. And that's when Mike Ryman said, well, you know, the decision was made at the little White House in California. John Mitchell, Mr. Hoover, and Mr. Nixon. They made the decision to let these people break in and lock their butts up for as long as they could.
The actual trial of the Camden 28 began during the first week of February 1973, about a year and a half after the arrest. A lot had happened since the arrest. Obviously, Hardy had filed the affidavit. All the newspapers carried the story. It was big stuff. They were not going to call Hardy. They knew it. On opening day, they made us an offer that they thought we couldn't refuse, and that was cop a plea to one misdemeanor. And it's obviously up to the judge what's going to happen, but chances are you're not going to spend much time, if any, in jail. And the question was, are you going to take their offer? We are facing 7 felony counts, and it came down to this: take one misdemeanor and we'll forget it. And so we said, we got to talk about this, because some people wanted to do it right away. I mean, they just saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and others, hey, wait a minute. You know, we're here to make some statements. We're political people. And I remember Ed McGowan, as I recall, at the end of the meeting saying, I think that we should open that door and say, Barry, call your first witness.
There's no question in my mind that the major dynamic in this case was Hardy and Hardy's affidavit. And the thinking behind the offer was the same as the thinking behind the offer in any prosecution. This case obviously had a big problem. Robert Hardy was no longer on the government side, he was on the defense side. And we're also looking at a long, unwieldy trial with a bunch of defendants who were going to be representing themselves. So it's just going to be a long, tough grind as a piece of litigation.
Some people chose to act as co-counsel. And that meant that those particular people would act as their own attorney with an attorney, a member of the bar, as co-counsel. Others chose to go pro se. Pro se literally means for yourself. We acted as our own attorney. The reality is that we were all co-counsel because the lawyers were sitting up there with us and we were interacting with them all the time. And it was de facto co-counsel. But legally, some were pro se, some were co-counsel. I think I went pro se.
That the group would never allow the lawyers to take over the situation, but that the situation would be determined by, directed by, and energized by the, as I say, the truth of the group rather than the professional action of the lawyer. And yet the lawyer was needed.
When it came to trial, we were allowed to make opening statements, direct examination, and we could cross-examine. And then we made closing statements.
The prosecution's case was very complete. I mean, there was that little wrinkle of their star witness turning on them. But they had all the evidence they could possibly need. And they had defendants who, in all our opening statements, said, we absolutely did all of these things.
I set out my opening statement with 3 questions. The terrible question that we try to put before you is simply this: who went too far? Did the military go too far by entering Vietnam and continuing in the war there for 12 years or more? Did the Camden 28 go too far in trying to stop it? Or did the FBI go too far in giving help to the defendants to make it possible in August of '71? And what does too far mean when the killing has started and you want to stop it?
They took months and proved all the details of facts that we said basically were true right from the beginning. So, and we said, I believe I said something like it in my opening, that their case was going to be a waste of time. What we used it for was, in large part, to lay the groundwork for Hardy's testimony, because every FBI witness who came up, if they said, well, there was a meeting and they planned and there was an agreement to raid the board, well, then why didn't you arrest them? And who ordered you not to arrest them? And we tried to go up the ladder of command as high as it would go, and it was clear it came from FBI headquarters and from the Department of Justice.
The FBI believed that at least some part of this group had been responsible for the break-in at the Media, Pennsylvania FBI office and the disclosure and publication of all these documents about the COINTELPRO thing and about how they, basically targeted the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Panther Party very specifically, and all those documents were published.
That's what the reason was, that 47 years was on the table, so that somebody would crack and give up the people who did media. That's why the case went forward. The beauty of what happened is that with the media documents, keeping the trial consistent with the action, we were able to use the media documents to cross-examine FBI agents about their conduct and about what they did and what they didn't do and how they dealt with the anti-war movement and how they internally were undermining the roots of civil liberties in this country.
I was the very first defendant to be put up in the Camden 28. I was small, I was a foreigner. They put me up first. And I was asked by my good friend Ned Murphy, who was being my lawyer, he said to me, "Did you do it?" Imagine that in front of everybody. "Did you do it?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And that was the end of the trial, really, right there. But then I said to the jury, "I'm sure you would like to know why." The other thing that the judge allowed me to do, which was really remarkable in my presentation, I wanted to show slides in the courtroom, and he said I could show the slides without comment. And the slides were a mixture of slides I made in North Camden of burned out houses and slides of burned out war situations in Vietnam.
When Bob Hardy took the stand, I questioned him, and no defendant or other lawyer asked any questions. For some of them, I think it was a difficult holding back because they were understandably really upset with this man. You know, he had turned them in and he had betrayed them.
I went to this FBI office here, spoke with an agent with the understanding, and it was always, every time I talked, that those folks from Camden would never be locked up, would never receive any jail time.
What emerges is, from his story, basically the provision of both physical resources, equipment, and strategies, overcoming every obstacle at points where the defendants were about to give up.
Carey's pulled this one off. It was really, like I said, a Perry Mason thing. He had a box. He puts it on the table in front of the juries. and he's going to point out to them how involved the FBI was in this. And he reach in the box and pull out a tool, a drill, hammer. Bob Hardy's on the stand. He says, "Bob, who paid for this?" "The feds." "Who paid for this?" "The feds." He goes through everything in that box. He must have had maybe 40, 50 items in the box.
On the floor in front of the jury, this FBI pile was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the FBI provided pile was all the necessary equipment with ropes and walkie-talkies and screwdrivers and drills, including a portable drill. And all that was in the defendant pile was a can from V8 juice, a couple drill bits, and a saw blade.
In the course of what happened with Bob Hardy, we had the data, the evidence to show not only was there madness to the war, but there's real madness to the way the government was trying to squash protests.
After Bob Hardy was on the stand and so forth, that there were 31 witnesses came on for the defense of the Camden 28, and some of them were extraordinary. So there was no danger that the trial and the quality of the trial and the splendid truth of the trial would in any way be locked in with the Bob Hardy presentation. You know, it wasn't. It soared beyond that, like in such a magnificent way. Howard Zinn was extraordinary in that trial too, as he, with his sense of history and clarity, laid out the realities to that jury.
I was explaining to the jury, the civil disobedience is not an outlaw idea. It's on its face, it's an outlaw idea since it involves breaking laws, but it's not an outrageous idea because, in fact, it is at the center of American democratic philosophy.
But they were doing what the Boston Tea Party people did in the American Revolution. They were doing what the people who defied the Fugitive Slave Acts and freed slaves before the Civil War did. They were doing what Americans had done all through American history in order to win justice for people.
I wanted to talk to the jury about that because we Americans grow up with such a deeply ingrained idea we must obey the law, and that the law is holy, and it's a very bad education we all get because that misses the distinction between law and justice, and misses the understanding that most rational people have when they think of it, that law and justice don't coincide very often, and that the law may in fact perpetuate injustice. And when a law perpetuates injustice, it is necessary to break that law.
And underlying everything was the fact of the defendants' feelings about the war and their intention to make the war part of this trial. So those things were also very much in our mind.
The jury was like, they were like went to college. They went to the university. They learned so much. We all learned. And I suppose Elizabeth Good, mother of Bob Good, would have been as an extraordinary witness as ever was on a stand anywhere. And she was in that unique position. She had lost her son in Vietnam, her son Paul. She had a son, Bob, on trial for opposing the war.
I think it's probably fair to say that for the 6 years after my brother's death, that it was very important for my mom to have sort of something to believe in about his death. That it was for democracy, it was for the country, it was for, all things good. One of the things that Professor Zinn discussed was the history of the Pentagon Papers and what the Pentagon Papers spoke to from the internal eyes-only analysis of the war versus what the sort of American people were being told or led to believe.
The Pentagon Papers showed very clearly that the United States was not in Vietnam for purposes of liberty and democracy and humanitarian and self-determination. But the Pentagon Papers showed very clearly that South Vietnam was not simply an independent state calling upon the United States to rescue it from northern invaders, but that South Vietnam was, as the Pentagon Papers put it very directly, they said, and in fact these are the words of the Pentagon Papers, South Vietnam was essentially the creation of the United States. We had set it up, and then they asked us to come in, because we asked them to ask us to come in. And what the Pentagon Papers also showed in the secret memos that went on the National Security Council to the Department of State, memos here and there, in those memos what they were saying again and again when they were talking about why we were in Vietnam and why we were interested in Southeast Asia, they were talking about tin, rubber, oil, talking about the resources of Southeast Asia.
As Professor Zinn was speaking, my mother was in the front row, and there was a sob that started and a cry that started. And finally, this sort of very cathartic crying that was just, what it was unleashing of all those years that she realized that she had to reconcile.
On June the 19th, I got a letter from Paul. We got a letter from Paul. And we was always anxious to get his mail, so I read the letter, and it was real nice. And he was saying about, I have a brother that lives in Hawaii, and he said his R&R was coming up, and maybe he would opt for going to Hawaii for his rest and relaxation from the Vietnam War. Can you imagine? But that afternoon, I just happened to get a terrible feeling, and it just kept getting very strong that something had happened to him. And I just kept trying to shake it off, and so I didn't tell anybody. So whenever my husband came, I gave him the letter, and he read it, and I said, "What do you think of it?" And he said, "Oh, well, maybe we'll go to Hawaii and see Paul when he gets there." And I said, "No, I think something's happened to him." And he said, "Oh, don't tell me that." And I said, "Yeah." So then that next day, I heard a car pull in our drive. I always had a vision, or thought, that when the man came to the house to tell me about Paul, he would be walking up the drive. And so when I heard a car door slam, and I had to look up like this over the window, and there the Army officer was getting out of his car. And I said to Marilyn, "Oh my God, the Army officer here to tell me about Paul." And she said, "What about Paul, Mom?" And I said, "Well, he's gone." And by that time, he was at the door. So he knocked on the door. "Is this the John Good residence?" And I said, "Yes, it is, and come in, because I've been expecting you." So he said, "Old lady, don't cry." He says, "This is just a telegram." He says, I said, I know. But I said, "He's gone." So we opened that telegram, and it was that he was missing in action, and he was missing since June the 19th was the last time he was seen. On Friday of that same week, the Army officer did come to tell us that he was killed in action on June. The last time he was seen alive was on June the 19th.
Her son had, died quite recently. It was one of the most emotional moments I've ever seen in the courtroom anywhere, certainly anywhere. And the serendipity of it is that it came right after Howard Zinn, because Howard was just so clear, just so absolutely clear, and almost like a mantra, how clear it was and how wrong the war was. And then on top of that clarity came Mrs. Good with the heart. This is what it means in human terms. Here's what it means.
Mr. Zinn put it so beautifully when he said that they are kidnapped, literally, and they are taken 10,000 miles away from home. Most of them just kids that maybe haven't been more than 50 miles away from home, like my son. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves. I know that I was. I am ashamed of the day I took my son to that airplane and put him on. I'm ashamed of any pride that I had when these taps were played, and I did have pride in my country. To take that lovely boy and to tell him you are fighting for your country, how stupid can you get? He was fighting for his country. Can anybody stand here and tell me that he was fighting for his country? I can't understand what we were doing over there. We should get out of this, but not one of us raised our hands to do anything about it. We left it up to these people, Camden 28 people, for them to do it, and now we are prosecuting them for it. God help us. That's just part of my testimony.
That had a lot of impact on everybody who heard that. And the judge was absolutely right in permitting that testimony, although its legal relevance was probably marginal.
There's a presumption that if important and big, powerful people make statements and have a lot of propaganda, that that's the truth. In the Camden 28 trial, it was a test of whether the truth lay with the ordinary little people, like Mrs. Good when she dealt with war. Or was it the truth of J. Edgar Hoover or Richard Nixon? I suppose in my whole life I never will ever again feel the energy and inspiration of the moment of giving my closing statement. What I love about this trial and its history and its time, it gave us a platform to make this statement that life is what's important. Mrs. Good is saying that word better than anyone in the world. She was saying it. Life, how important it is.
I just hope that this day of remembrance and inspiration can really be more a time of renewal for us, renewal of our faith and our courage and our commitment to find our voices, young voices, middle-aged voices, and older voices, to link all our voices, to continue to work for peace, to continue to nourish life, because it's lifelong work and the job is not done.
I'm very proud and privileged to be with them today, as I was 30 years ago when we went through this action, because it says for all of us exactly what people of conscience should be about, and that's why I was here.
There are certain points in history where a society goes so wrong, and there are certain people who will say, I won't stand for that, and I will risk career, life, limb, family, freedom, and I will take this risk and I will go and do it. And it's certainly not something that's over. We're going to be called upon again.
If the conditions of the Vietnam experience, the war at that time, were to happen again, I think all of us, including myself, would be right on that front line again. I would follow that same path. I'd probably be in another draft board and do it over again.
30 years ago. And it's been exciting. It's been great. It's been a life-changing experience, I think, for all of us. It's been a good ride. And I want to thank all of you for being in my life and allowing me to be in your life, because you've made it a great ride.
Finish up the closing statement with the statement that I wasn't happy that the prosecutor had the last word, because he does have the last closing statement. So I wasn't happy about that, and I said that, but I was thinking about that, and John Barry doesn't have the last word. You have the last word, the jury. You have the last word. And then I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that you have the last two words.
The jury foreman was asked to read the verdict. We all stood up, and we linked arms because it was all about what happens to one would happen to all. And I had my when the jury started, the foreman started reading the verdict at the prompting of the judge. I had my head bent. I think everybody did.
Your Honor, on count one, we find defendant Terry Bucklew not guilty.
Count two, not guilty. Count
Count 3, not guilty.
Count number 4, not guilty. 5, 6, 7, not guilty. And then the judge says, is there anything different about any other of the defendants? No.
I just said, they did it. It was just it was unbelievable to me that it actually turned out that way. They did it.
The government today lost yet another of its cases against anti-war activists. This trial was in Camden, New Jersey.
This was the scene in the courthouse lobby minutes after the not guilty verdicts were announced. More than 100 relatives and friends were present as the defendant's 2-year ordeal ended.
I thought it would be a hung jury. But I didn't know any of the people except my son, and they're the most beautiful people in the world. I have to go back and convert my husband. Not only my husband, but my family. But my husband's a good fellow, but, you know, he was too afraid to come today because he was afraid, you know, the verdict would be bad, so he didn't come.
Defendant Father Edward Murphy of New York said the tide has turned in favor of peace activists.
We did it. After 5 years, we finally made sense to them. We've been having a guilty for 5 years for opposing this war, and we finally got it not guilty. The people understood.
And those 12 members of the jury, they made the decision, and I always remember Anna Bertino, the wonderful juror from Hamilton, telling me about the man that was beside her. She was from Camden, and she told me that when they went their first round the table to see where people stood, and that man said, they're innocent. And I'll tell you why. And he put it so simply, he said, when the big cats saw the little cats go up the ladder, and the big cats didn't stop the little cats, I say, the big cats is guilty.
He said, you're right, and you're not guilty because of that. And that was us, that was the 28, but that was everybody, that was the whole movement. Finally saying, we heard you. You guys are right. And that's a good feeling. Even if people don't agree with you, you know you've been vindicated by the system. The system said, you're right, go home.
I remember being up there, walking through the halls or whatever, and seeing a couple of them. I forget who they were. And I just said, hey, well, congratulations. I mean, they achieved what they wanted. I thought it was appropriate to say that. Well, yeah, no thanks to you. Well, no, no thanks to me, and I would have preferred you were convicted, you know. And I think they should have been.
Prosecutors always have a saying, sometimes they believe it and sometimes they don't, that we respect the verdict of the jury, something that prosecutors say when they lose a case. But I respect the verdict that jury reached. I think they did the right thing in this case.
And it's almost like the power of all the good work that everyone was about, and all the struggle and all the pain, all came together in this positive, powerful way. And I remember at some point we just broke out the whole courtroom, not the jury, I'm guessing, I don't remember, or the judge or the prosecution, singing Amazing Grace. It was quite a gift. It was quite a gift.
Camden was the perfect place for to make the statement that there was the monies that spent on bombs could be spent on buildings. That was the big point we're trying to make, and it's still true. In fact, it's more true today, and we're still wasting the money on the weaponry, and we still have Camden the way it is. So there is no vision, and the people are perishing here because there's no vision.